Great. So welcome, everybody. Thanks. We're so glad you could join us. I'm the project manager for the Ogallala Water Coordinated Agriculture Project. This is a USDA-NIFA funded project that involves 40 researchers and their students based at 9 institutions across the Ogallala Aquifer region. One of our project collaborators is Dr. Bill Golden, an agricultural economist based at Kansas State University. Dr. Golden's area of focus is water policy and water use and the impacts these have on producers, the regional economy, and the environment. Dr. Golden spends the majority of his time working with the state, GMDs, and other stakeholder groups, including farmers, policymakers, and others throughout Kansas, in developing and implementing policies associated with the state's natural resources. Dr. Golden also works extensively with land water-related issues such as valuing irrigation water rights and on understanding the impacts on communities of adopting alternative water conservation policies. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bill.
And there we go. So guys, I'm glad to be here. And in case y'all haven't figured this out yet, this is my first Zoom session. Okay? So hopefully we'll have some fun today. We'll talk, maybe we'll get some good questions. I want to recognize Kellen. She's with the Kansas Department of Ag. She works with me on several projects. And Jonathan Ogallala, they both had input into this presentation. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. A lot of them I'm not the expert in, but at some point during the presentation, I will tell you who the expert is so we can talk to them. I'm going to paint this presentation in very broad, sweeping terms. We're going to cover a lot of issues today. I want to start by giving you a little background on Kansas water law. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, so bear with me. But the Kansas Water Right Appropriation Act occurred in 1945, and the water in Kansas is dedicated to the use of the people of the state. So essentially, we're a prior appropriation state, a first in time, first in right. There are two types of basic water rights from the standpoint of groundwater. There are vested water rights and appropriated water rights. As a general rule, vested water rights are going to get their water one way or the other. The Appropriation Act only applies to the appropriate water right users. Looking at a water right in Kansas, there are several components. One is an appropriation date. That's the time the state allowed them to start using groundwater for beneficial use. Water right also has an authorized place of use. So if you have a water right in Kansas for, let's just say, a quarter section, the only place you can use that water is on that quarter section. You can't move it to the adjoining section, even if you own that water, even if you own that adjoining quarter section. So it's an authorized place of use. You have an authorized quantity. That is an annual acre-inch allocation. In western Kansas, the average is most water rights are 24 acre-inches a year. Some of them are 18 inches a year. As a general rule, there are very few wells that have the capacity to pump their annual allocation. Well capacities have declined so much over time. And then the water right also includes an authorized rate, and that's a well capacity that was assigned or authorized when they received the water right. It doesn't have a lot of impact today because water capacities and water well flow rates have declined so much in Kansas. The chief engineer of the state of Kansas is in charge of enforcing and monitoring the water rights of the state. He's charged with enforcing and administrating the laws for the benefit of all inhabitants of Kansas. And it's interesting to note that it's unlawful for any person to prevent, by diversion or otherwise, any water from the state moving to a person having a prior right. In other words, the law says you can't, if you've got a junior right, you can't infringe upon a senior right. Okay, so that's the basics of Kansas water law that we need to talk about right now. We're seeing a lot of interest in water conservation, and I wanted to touch base on the different carrots and sticks that are motivating this interest. The sticks tend to be mandatory command and control regulations. These types of regulations are mandated by the state. They're a top-down process. The stakeholders have very, very little input into it. The IGUCA, the Intensive Groundwater Use Control Area, is an example of the command and control structure. The chief engineer can mandate an intensive groundwater control area, okay, if that IGUCA is recommended by the GMDs, or if enough people in the area want it. He can initiate the proceedings if we have significant groundwater declines, or groundwater withdrawals equal or exceeding the recharge. Now, assume that the majority of people attending this meeting are somewhat familiar with Ogallala, and guys, the whole Ogallala has significant groundwater declines, and the whole Ogallala region is in a situation where withdrawals tend to exceed recharge. And so you could ask the question, why isn't the chief engineer initiating IGUCAs all over Kansas? And the basic reason is because an IGUCA has to be started at the groundwater management district level, or you have to have enough people to request an IGUCA. And there has been a tendency for the people of Kansas not to want to do that. The IGUCA is a relatively top-down structure, and the local community loses control when an IGUCA is implemented. There are probably 6 or 7 IGUCAs in the state of Kansas. The most probably widely known is the Walnut Creek IGUCA that occurred in 1992. That IGUCA was implemented because groundwater extraction was infringing upon stream flow. When that went to the chief engineer, obviously the local people lost control. The chief engineer has rules and regulations that he's got to follow. He decides what needs to be done to come up with a solution to the problem, and his solution was that they determined a senior water right date and a junior water right date, and they cut senior water rights by 22% and 33%, depending upon their location relative to the Walnut Creek, while the junior water rights had their appropriated water reduced from 64 to 71%. So they had some huge water cuts. John Leatherman and I just finished a study on the wet Walnut Creek, and we found that actually there was very little economic damage. The IGUCA actually restored stream flow. It actually stabilized the aquifer. So by nearly all measures, it was a success, but the local folks didn't have much voice in it. And what you'll find in Kansas is that IGUCA is just a pretty bad word. Nobody wants to implement an IGUCA because once they do, they lose control. The other stick that the state of Kansas has is something called an impairment process, or water right administration process. This process occurs when a senior water right holder contends that a junior water right holder is infringing upon his ability to get water. It starts with a complaint. Bottom line, once the complaint is made, it goes to the chief engineer. The local participants lose control of it. If an impairment is found, the chief engineer imposes those rules and regulations necessary to alleviate the impairment. Here again, it's a top-down structure. The chief engineer has rules and regulations that he has got to follow. Once they go to the impairment process, they have pretty well the local folks have pretty well lost any ability to impact the impairment process. The impairment process is a very long process. It can take several years. They have to go through well pumping tests, review logs. The Kansas Geological Survey will get involved and help determine where the impairment is coming from. Once all the data is reviewed, the GMDs and the neighbors are submitted with an initial report, and then a final report comes out. So this process can take several years. We have just had an impairment complaint, our process in Kansas, in Haskell County. It started in 2005. Initially, because of the impairment complaint, people expressed an interest in an IGUCA. As I said, nobody really wants an IGUCA. That complaint was withdrawn, but it came back in 2012. It went to the Court of Appeals in 2015, and finally the district court granted permanent injunction in 2017. So the process can take several years. It's out of, once it goes to the chief engineer, it's out of the hands of the local stakeholders. In this particular case, well HS3 happened to be the senior right. He initially was felt he was being impaired by his two closest neighbors, I believe, and that was the original complaint. When the chief engineer finished his review, they decided that it was actually 5 wells that were infringing on HS3, and so they wound up shutting down 5 wells. That's not exactly what the senior water right wanted going in, but that's what happened. Interesting, the Court of Appeals in the ruling pointed out that it was apparent that the legislature, when they came up with water law, the Appropriation Act, that they fully intended for senior water right users to be able to seek both injunctive and financial relief in the case of infringement by a junior water right holder. And so, guys, that is the other big stick. Now let's look at some carrots. Okay.
If we could, if I could jump in real quick, and I think you just addressed this, but I thought we'd address it while you were on that slide. Someone said, "Is Bill aware that there is an Attorney General opinion that states the CE can institute an IGUCA on its own without the GMD?"
Ask me that question once again.
So, and I'm trying to read this as best I can because I don't know all the issues. Says, but Ray says, "Is Bill aware that there is an Attorney General opinion that states the CE can institute an IGUCA on his own or on its own without the GMD?"
No, I wasn't aware of that. I assume by CE he means the chief engineer.
Yeah, right.
I was not aware of that.
Okay. Well, we can take that. I mean, that's, we can all take it,
and we can
do our own.
We can have that discussion. I'm not an attorney. Yes, I won't get into that. What David Barfield will and won't do. Okay. Obviously, a IGUCA is a politically negative thing. Okay. So yes. The chief engineer might have the ability to step in and do that. Whether he really will or not, I can't answer that. We need to get David Barfield on the phone and ask him that question.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's look at the carrots. We've talked about the sticks. The sticks are tough in Kansas. Okay, we've got the law. A lot of people don't have to go through the impairment process. That turns neighbor against neighbor. They don't want to go through the IGUCA process. Those are both top-down Once you start them, you can't stop them. Okay, so it's difficult to go that path. So the state of Kansas has elected to go with something they call voluntary incentive-based regulations. They want to achieve an absolute reduction in groundwater use over historic metrics. And specifically, they want these regulations to be controlled by local stakeholders. They feel that that is the best way to do it. Let's talk about local enhanced management areas. The LEMA concept was actually developed as an alternative to the IGUCA. Okay, it allows local communities to set their own goals and implement their own policies. The program is voluntary, but once it's approved, it becomes law. There is no firm rules associated with the LEMA. Okay, the local producers negotiate between themselves, the state, the local GMDs, to decide what the criteria will be for the LEMA. They get to decide who gets to vote on whether they participate in the LEMA. Whether they get to decide whether it's just the board of directors of the GMD vote, or whether they let the water right holders vote. They can decide, if, as an example, if one person has 10 water rights, they get to decide if he gets 10 votes or if he only gets 1 vote. They get to decide on the amount of groundwater use reduction. Does it need to be 5% or 10% or 20%? They, at the time, they can discuss how that's going to be calculated. Is it going to be calculated based on a person's historic use or some historic use in the area? They get to decide the duration of the program. Is this a 3-year program, a 5-year program, or a 10-year program? They get to analyze and discuss the modifications to the existing water rights. In other words, are we going to eliminate the place of use restriction and let people use the water where they want to use it? Are they going to allow people to sell their water to their neighbor? They get to decide what are going to be the penalties within this LEMA for overuse. One LEMA that is being talked about right now is going to charge $1,000 an occurrence for overuse. Other LEMAs that are being discussed or in place have more or less penalties. And they get to decide who within the LEMA boundaries are going to be exempt from the LEMA. In other words, are they going to exempt the rural community? Are they going to exempt feedlots and dairies? How do they handle these special cases? As a result, the LEMAs are a very, very flexible tool. Okay, we currently have a LEMA in Sheridan 6. The process actually started in 2006. In 2010-11 period, my understanding is that the chief engineer finally said, hey, if you give me this proposal, I'm going to act on it, but you don't have any input anymore to the groundwater management district and the people in the LEMA. And of course, nobody liked that. And it was out of that discussion that the LEMA legislation got enacted in 2012 that allowed people to be much more flexible than the IGUCA. That LEMA reduced water use by 20%. It was a 5-year LEMA, and the producers just voted to extend it for another 5 years. There is a GMD 4 district-wide LEMA that was approved about 2 months ago. GMD had a district-wide LEMA vote. It got turned down. They're proceeding in another direction, and we're currently in discussions with a group in Finney County to try to start a LEMA there in GMD 3. So the LEMA process is going good, and now I will ask a question. I don't have an answer to this question, okay? But it was asked at a recent meeting to the chief engineer, given that we had an impairment complaint in Haskell County, and we resulted in a total of 5 wells being shut down, if they had farmed a LEMA, would the judge and the chief engineer have ruled the way they did and shut down those 5 pivots? That question was asked to David Barfield. He grinned and basically said that he was sure that the judge would take that into consideration in making his final determination. So I can't tell you that, whether the correct answer to that, but I had a conversation last week with a group of producers in Finney County, and we started these discussions several months ago, and the discussion always centered around, we have got to do this because we've got to preserve the water for our kids and grandkids, and we've got to reduce water use. And last week, the discussion centered around the fact we've got to have a LEMA to avoid any future impairment claims. So I don't know, but we do have a stick out there, and we have a carrot to help out with it. We also have water conservation areas. Okay, these conservation areas are very similar to LEMAs, except they tend to be on a smaller scale. They follow the same process. You develop a conservation plan, you negotiate with the state, and then you enter into an agreement to modify your existing water right with a conservation component included. We currently have 6 water conservation areas in the state. Wichita County Water Conservation Area is one that receives a lot of publicity. They have decided that over time they want to reduce their water use by 50%. They're going to do it in increments. They're going to start with 29% reduction and then move forward, trying to get to a sustainable aquifer. That tool is available. We're also seeing water technology farms pop up. We currently have 5, and these 5 farms are demonstrating new technology on a field scale. Okay, they're in the hands of the farmers, and they're operated by farmers. The equipment, as a general rule, is being supplied by the manufacturers. We currently have demonstration farms that are using mobile drip irrigation. This is a new technology that may have the ability to save water. There are probably 8 pivots on this farm. Part of them are fitted with the mobile drip system. Part of them are conventional center pivots, and we are carrying out an evaluation on how these work. We're also spending a lot of time developing and installing soil water probes. We're having field days. There's just a lot of interest in figuring out ways to become more efficient. In fact, this last week, I had a call from a manufacturer in Israel, and they think we're doing it wrong, guys. I mean, we're using soil probes and monitoring the level of moisture in the soil. They think we need to be monitoring the level of moisture in the plant itself. And they have developed a system that the monitors actually attach to plants, and you monitor the plant growth and the plant itself. And they have asked us to put that out on a demonstration farm and do the economic analysis associated with that. So there's a great deal of interest in the water technology farms. Okay, so now the obvious question is we've got a lot going on. Kansas is in the press a lot with their desire to reduce water consumption and try to extend the life of the aquifer. And we can ask ourselves, why is it occurring now? Well, as I look at that, I'm going to have to say that it's occurring now because Governor Brownback placed an emphasis on the Ogallala aquifer. He started in 2011. I remember that date. Kansas State Research and Extension had developed an Ogallala task force, and we met with the governor out in Colby, Kansas, and the governor charged us at the time with figuring out how to reduce groundwater use and grow the economy at the same time. Well, I'm not sure we had figured that out yet, but that is when the date that I start saying, hey, we started seeing an interest from the governor at the governor's level on the Ogallala. In 2011, we previously had a conference called The Future of Water in Kansas, and the governor put his name on that and started speaking at that conference. He started in the 2011-12 period, modifying laws in Kansas to make it more flexible. He got rid of the use it or lose it rule. He got the Lima legislation passed. He started doing a lot of positive things. In 2013, he announced a vision for the future of water in Kansas. He made some very powerful statements that we had to solve our water problems, that we couldn't meet our future goals associated with growth if we didn't. At that point in time, he called for a vision for the future of water in Kansas, a 50-year vision, and he started building and mobilizing teams. Now, guys, I know I don't want to leave anybody out, okay? Kellen was nice enough to send me a list of all the people on the teams, and that would have taken about 5 or 6 slides to list everybody. So I can't list everybody. I don't want to leave anybody out, but it was a huge mobilization within Kansas of getting people to work together. The Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Division of Water Resources, and the Kansas Water Office took the lead. They've done a fantastic job. They're interested in all facets and involved in all facets of this. K-State Research and Extension is involved, the Kansas Geological Survey. If you look at all the LEMAS and all the water conservation areas, they're doing modeling specific for those areas. I would be remiss if I didn't take my hat off to the USDA-NIFA. Now, that might sound like a strange partner, but one of the things that we need to realize is that when you change water use, when you voluntarily agree to use less water, you stand the chance under current policy of not being eligible for irrigated crop insurance. And that was a big stumbling block to voluntarily reducing water use. K-State and Nebraska got together. They worked with RMA and developed a way to adjust yields to reflect limited irrigation. So RMA now has a limited irrigation crop insurance policy. So the government, since the governor's call for action, we've had over 500 public meetings. We've talked to over 15,000 Kansans about water use, how to reduce water use, how to conserve water. I started working in groundwater conservation 15 years ago. At that point in time, you would have people from the state, people from the university, and farmers, people from the groundwater management districts attend the meetings. The last series of meetings we've attended to, we have seen attendance through all sorts of public and community organizations. People that aren't directly involved in irrigated agriculture. We have completed the 50-year vision now, and we're working on the implementation phase. And the implementation phase, we've talked about water conservation areas. That's part of the result of the water vision and the technology farms. There was a big interest on producer standpoint to have field level demonstration farms, multi-pivot demonstration farms. So those are a couple of things that have come out of the water vision. I'll close right now with a statement by Governor Brownback at the recent water conference. There are a lot of people there, and he says, guys, we know this aquifer. You can't say, no, we need to study it more. Now is the time. And guys, I love that quote, because that's why it's happening now. Is the governor has got behind it. He has made it a priority, and we're moving in a very positive direction toward water conservation. Okay, so additional information. Over the last 3 months, the Kansas Water Office has hosted a Kansas Water Talk series. On a lot of my slides, I have listed the source. At this website, you can download the presentations that were made at those 8 or 10 different meetings. You'll see Jonathan's presentation on water technology farms. You'll see Dave Barfield's presentation on the impairment process. There's a lot of good information there, and at the Kansas Water Office and the Division of Water Resources website. So with that, I guess we'll take questions if anybody wants to take questions.
Okay, no questions at this time, but we'll hang out for a few minutes, and certainly if anybody has questions, or just if you have any general comments you'd like to make, we'd ask you make those in chat, or make those in chat, and then if you have any specific questions for Bill, ask those in Q&A. Kate put a question in Q&A or a comment. She says, "Great talk, Bill. What do you think are some of the constraints for innovation and or technology adoption at the farm level in Kansas?"
I think the biggest barrier to adoption is being able to convince producers that it will reduce their water use, that it will make them money, that they'll receive returns in yields. That is the predominant question or answer that I receive in talking to farmers, and I think that's highlighted by the series of talks that we have had around Kansas and the water technology farms that came out of the Water Vision meetings, is the fact that, guys, it's not that we don't like your extension reports and the work you're doing in extension. What we want to see is this technology in the hand of farmers, so we can talk to farmers and see if it's generating bottom line profits. Right.
All right. Aaron says, you said you'd recently completed a study of the Walnut Creek IGUCA. Is that out in print somewhere?
Yes, that ought to be on the K-State website. It ought to be, it'll be published in an economic journal in the next couple of months, but there should be a copy of it on the agmanager.info website.
Okay. You don't happen to have a copy? I was gonna say, if you could get to it in your web browser, you could post a link in chat, Bill, if you wanted to share that with folks. If you think if you're able to do it.
I would love to do that. Except I'm afraid if I turn this screen off, I'll never get back to it.
Yeah, that's fine. And I was gonna say, sometimes our attendees are better at finding stuff like that. Certainly, attendees, if you're able to get to that document and you could share it in chat, that would be much appreciated.
But I will review it real quick. I mean, if we have time.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay,
we've got.
The IGUCA was, the wet Walnut Creek was basically drying up. And the people who used the water from the wet Walnut Creek had vested water rights. And they came up basically saying, hey, we're going to shut everybody off if y'all don't come up with a plan. And the IGUCA was the plan. Now, you've got to realize that this was 1992. When this occurred. John and I tracked Tracy ag economy for the area inside the IGUCA and compared it to the area outside the IGUCA. And what we found was that during the first 5 years, you got to remember this was an immediate, there wasn't any, hey, this is going to happen in a couple of years. One day they had the water and the next day they didn't. And during the first 5 years, we saw revenues decline, our profits decline by about 50%. absolutely terrible on the local producers. After 5 years, the remaining 15 years of the study, they came back and there was no statistical difference between their growth rate in profits and their, as compared to those folks outside the LEMA. Now that's a pretty amazing finding. I mean, basically we found that in the long run, there was no statistically significant decline in profits. But we did see a lot of changes on the producers, from the producer standpoint. That tended to be a flood irrigated area. We saw the farmers adopt center pivots. We saw them reduce their plantings of low profit crops and go to corn and alfalfa. So bottom line, my recommendation is today, don't jump, try to ease into water use restrictions. You've got to learn how to do it. You've got to be committed to the process. You've got to know you're going to stay with it. But there is a learning curve to being able to handle less water, to use less water in growing your crops. So, can we do that today in western Kansas? I don't really think so. I don't think we can cut water use 50 or 60% and not expect to have pretty significant declines in profits. We're currently monitoring, and the reason for that is we're already predominantly corn, which is a high profit crop. We're already predominantly center pivot. But what we are finding, we're monitoring the Lima in Sheridan 6. We have been monitoring that for the last 4 years. We've got a panel of producers that are giving us their financial information. And what we're finding there is that, yes, they are capable of reducing water use and not reducing net profits. The general comment from those producers is we're just better water managers. We're making better use of rainfall. We're paying more attention to the inputs we put into these crops. So I think it's reasonable as we see these LEMAs and water conservation areas, more and more of those go into place, that we can say, hey, we're not going to see a big economic impact. A lot of it, to be honest, depends upon how efficient farmers are in their water use right now. If they're not very efficient, then yeah, you can reduce water use and not reduce profits. Next question.
All righty, I put a link. I think I found your study. I put a link in chat so folks can view it there.
Okay.
Megan says, what do you think are the most relevant economic indicators to assess the impact of restrictions in water use, such as the Walnut Creek example? Have you seen land tenure changes or increasing farm sizes or community economic metrics?
Well, on the wet Walnut Creek area, we did go back and track land prices, and we could not see a change in land price. Of course, farm size is getting bigger, irregardless of what we do with water. So I don't know that we can necessarily tie increased farm size to reduced water use. Ask me that question again. So I'm not sure I answered it thoroughly.
Well, I mean, I think she said, yeah, one of the most relevant economic indicators to assess the impacts of restrictions in water use. Well,
right now, the ones that we have looked at, we're not seeing any indicators of negative economic impacts.
All righty. Ray says, what do you think about the idea that restrictions must come first and technology will then follow? I wonder if we can rely on one technology alone to reduce our water use to acceptable limits.
I would agree with that statement. It's harsh, okay? But once you're, as a producer, once you're faced with reduced allocations, you're going to learn how to use that allocation efficiently. And there might not be one technology out there that does it for him. But generally what we have found, Jeff Peterson and I did a study, this has been 7 years ago, that said technology adoption by itself doesn't do anything but you encourage producers to use more water. Okay? And I think that is a very consistent economic finding around the country, that technology is not going to help us reduce water use out of the Ogallala. It's very important to maintaining profits. And the concept of, okay, we're going to regulate you and then we're going to provide to you, Mr. Farmer, this technology to help you overcome it, I think is probably the most reasonable way to go. So I think you have to have regulations before you encourage technology.
Okay. Rich shared a great link in chat. Looks like of a handful of articles that that you've worked on. So thank you for doing that, Rich. Let's see. Amy asked a question about I guess this is more of a general question. How much water efficiency can be gained without impacting profitable yields?
That is a tremendous question.
$1 million quick question, right?
Do what?
That's the $1 million quick question.
That
right?
is the $1 million question. Amy, the problem is we have a really good handle on application efficiency. In other words, how efficient are center pivots and how efficient are subsurface drip irrigation systems. We have that data. The data we don't have is how efficient producers are at managing that water. And the reason for that is, to answer that question, you have got to have a data set that tells you not only how much water a producer used, but what crop he used it on. And my screen just went black.
It's fine. I think if you want to stop sharing, Bill, you can stop sharing. We don't need your screen share anymore. That's if you just click the end.
Stop share?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad I've got you here.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I've got to ask a question. I will show my ignorance. I've been having a warning show up all afternoon long on my screen that my connection is bad. Are y'all seeing that?
No, we don't see that. You'll get that on each individual person will see it based on their bandwidth.
Okay, so anyway, in order to really get to the how efficient are we question, you've got to have a data set that says we use this much water, we did it on this crop, we had this yield, this was our rainfall, and this is our soil. I mean, you've got to have and that database typically has not existed. Okay, so we don't really have a good handle on how efficient we are at using water. Some people will tell you we're only 50% efficient. Some people will tell you that we're 90% efficient. Fortunately, the Division of Water Resources in Kansas has worked with RMA, and they're actually putting together this data set to let us look at that. And I think that's going to be a key. I mean, if we find that, hey, we're only 70% efficient, then if we can get that to 90% efficient, a 20% cut doesn't mean anything. You're still getting the same net water to the plant. So that's an area of research we're going to try to continue with and follow up on. Unfortunately, there's not really good hard data right now to tell how efficient we are.
Yeah, I would think to your point, if you don't know where you're at currently, you can't, it doesn't, and then if you make a change, you don't know what that change is going to be and how it's going to affect your bottom line. Jose says, can remote sensing technology be used to infer on how efficient producers are in managing their water?
Yes, eventually, if we can get hold of the data. Here again, most of the remote sensing, well, yes. Now I'm thinking of remote sensing in the fact that a farmer has it on his field. Okay, but most of that data is owned by the farmer on, or the company providing the telemetry, and so it's hard to get on. It's hard to get to. But yes, that these advances in technology are going to let us get to a point where we can be as efficient as we can.
I mean, certainly to your point, things like rainfall totals for given areas and things like that, that's probably available now, I would think.
That is available now.
Yeah.
So the big challenge as far as combining this data was getting the water use information linked with the yield information. And that's two distinct. I'm not a database manager, okay. So, but that has been a challenge, and they have done that. RMA and the division have done that on a limited scale right now, and we're asking them to go ahead and update that and add the other variables we need to analyze this situation.
I wonder if are there privacy issues there with asking farmers or individual farms to give up that kind of data? I mean, generally, are farms okay with releasing that kind of data, or are they a little bit
I don't
weary?
know if they are or not, but RMA will release it. To my understanding, they will not let us. In other words, they will give me a data set that does not have any farmer information on it.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Yes. No, they're very concerned about the privacy, so they strip all identifiers off the observation. All they will give.
So it's basically correct data, but it's anonymous, or it's not linked.
It's anonymous. We don't know whose data it is.
Okay. Good. Okay, folks, we still got a few minutes left, so we'll hang out for any other questions that you might have. To your point, Bill, I do software development stuff too and write code, and so people always will come to software developers wanting a technology solution. So just thinking about what you were saying about the technology is not going to solve the problem. Most problems are due to human factors and human processes and things. The technology can inform our human processes that we've got in place. And like in your scenario, I'm thinking about there's technology that can let farmers know how much water they're using and those kind of things, but that's doesn't mean it's going to change their behavior. So usually the human behavior is the problem. There's no silver bullet for it. Okay, if still no questions, we'll just hang out for another 30 seconds or so. So last chance for any questions you might have. And Amy, did we have any kind of post webinar survey or anything we were going to share?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I would say that I might send a follow-up email asking anybody to provide any feedback to me, and they can write me with an email if they like.
Okay. So I'll put the link for the Learn event. Most of you, I assume, came here through the Learn event, but just so you know, again, we're recording this. There'll be a link to the recording at this Learn event. I just put in chat within a couple of days, so feel free to share that with any colleagues that you think might be interested and were not able to attend. And so no more questions at this time. Amy or Bill, any closing thoughts? Nope. All righty.
Nope,
okay.
It's been
Thanks
fun.
so much, Bill.
Thanks, folks.
Y'all have